Mr. Brian, how you doing, sir?
All right, Scott, how you doing tonight?
I'm hanging in there, man. I just got back from the gym with my son, and
Awesome.
had a really, interesting day today at work. Pretty slow, pretty chill, and yeah. So I'm just ready to talk about Jesus. What do you
Jesus.
think about
It's
Jesus?
Jesus. So the topic is Jesus God?
It can be.
It can be, right?
It can be whatever you
No,
want it to be, brother.
right. So have you watched any or read any of Bart Ehrman? He kind of
Yes.
claims that Jesus didn't even claim to be God.
Yes, yes, right. I've
Uh,
kind of watched a video where he was talking about that, and yeah, it's interesting the way he looks at the society, the culture he came from, what the earliest scriptures say. Watching the evolution of the scriptures, if you
right.
presume or you have the presupposition that it's all the word of God to begin with, one could be led to think that Jesus is God. But even a lot of religious people don't believe that Jesus is God, like Jehovah's Witnesses. Um, I think, of course, Jewish people, is Muslims,
Muslims? Yeah.
Muslims, um, and then some. Interestingly, I've heard Hindus say that they thought Jesus was God because they
And,
believe in myriad of gods. Like, and their definition of God is a bit different than the Abrahamic sort of concepts. So you've got Sai
right.
Baba, like you mentioned, a lot of different Babas out there.
Well, that's one thing that disturbed some people was he was also he was yeah, Jesus is God and Muhammad was right, and all
And hey,
religions lead to God,
yep.
which is a great it's a great outlook, that would
Hmm.
help for world peace a little bit, but
And
it drives
people
them both
talk
crazy.
about Christ consciousness,
Right.
where not necessarily, I guess, in the literal sense that Jesus is God or anything, but maybe that it's a way to attain a certain Christ-like consciousness, if you will. And I guess what that means, I mean, the way it would strike me, the way I would interpret it, we don't really know what consciousness is, first of all, but I assume what we're talking about is a mind, like a beingness. Like our conscious
Right.
experience is very primary, and so it's our just being. Consciousness isn't necessarily a thing in this context, but it's just a way of being mentally. And
Right.
so I think that Christ consciousness is supposed to be this universal way of being that people can share as a shared experience. Is something like that true? Well, what do we mean by true? I think I don't ever deny people their experience, right? Like
Right.
if
That's
people say that they experienced something, sure. I mean, I was religious for many years,
yeah.
and so I know exactly what they're talking about. So it's not
You
like,
know, that's
mhm.
that's one of the toughest ones in this, these whole debate kind of things because people do have genuine experiences,
Yep,
and you can't discount that, and it feels very real to them,
right.
but and it's
You
hard
know
to
what?
come out
Just
and
that
say
it's
no.
the framework that we're talking about. It depends on what we mean by these words. Like, you know, um, I was looking in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and I was looking at logical fallacies, just going over certain topics and subjects of epistemology under the heading of epistemology. And one section was talking about, is experience a valid reason to believe something, right? What
Right.
do most philosophers think on this matter? And it turns out that experience is the most valid reason to believe anything. Um, but that's subjectively.
Right.
So it's hard, but it's not valid to believe on someone's experience that is third party or something like that. Like, because it's subjective by nature. So you could
Right.
never prove a subjective truth objectively. It's
Right.
you know, you can describe it maybe objectively, but you couldn't really prove it that way. So in a way, Christ consciousness, is it true? Well, in that sort of sense, maybe it is, right? But does this mean that Jesus is God, or that this mystical stuff like supernaturalism, does this prove that supernaturalism is true? Not at all. You know, it's just I would think that for me, something like Christ consciousness would be sort of a philosophy or an outlook,
Right.
you know.
Right. And a certain awareness. Right.
Yeah, kind of like
You know.
pantheism.
Yeah.
Pantheism, the same way, just an outlook. Like we're all talking about the same thing, but we're just using different language, flowery language that you can never prove scientifically or objectively or even argue for it that way. It's mainly just a subjective sort of belief or outlook, rather, or even just
But
an expression.
right. But it's the objective part that causes the problem,
Right.
because you know, somebody can say, well, I had an experience of Jesus Christ over here, and a Muslim can say, I had an experience of Muhammad, or the
Hmm.
angel, whoever. And the Mormons have an experience of Moroni. So you see, they're all having experiences, but they can't really be external experiences.
Right.
So you really have to, I mean, at least to me, that just invalidates the idea of, well, this is something external.
Right.
you know
Right.
just
Right.
you know
It would probably be external only in the sense that it's information being conveyed. Like
right.
if someone's telling you a story about, leprechauns, it doesn't mean that leprechauns actually exist. But, the concept of leprechaun came from a public record somewhere, That's why you'll see people on the fence like Patrick Yarnell. In his little debate strategy, he always appeals to public record as a way to sort of ground what he's trying to say as truth. Like, this is why I'm true, because I'm grounding it in public record. This is objective fact. So he's kind of confusing categories, you
Yeah.
know,
And
and
he's
it's sort of
also
a sleight of hand bullshit tactic, in my opinion.
exactly, yeah, pretty much. And the fact that he's insisting this is the true historical record.
Yeah,
Well, you really don't have much grounds to say that. And I
right,
guess that's that. He starts with the presupposition, and that eliminates a whole lot of discourse.
right,
Like
right,
you notice he's never really took me up on you know Yahweh was a Canaanite god.
right.
You
He'll
know, he
never
was
go
in.
that way.
He'll never go that way. No, we're starting right here. This is the historical record. That's it.
Right. See, he's starting
Which is
from
why I
the
say it is a
Bible
good little
and
sleight of hand.
concluding. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
talking to people like that is sort of fruitless, and it's just a way to troll each other and have fun with,
Yep.
having fun playing chess, so to speak. Which I
Exactly.
don't mind that. That's just how I'm geared, I guess, mentally. But
Well, that's
in all seriousness, though, um, they don't have any evidence for their claim. If we're understanding, is Jesus God, as in how Victor Vargas, for example, would describe it.
right.
This sort of comic book characterization of a person, of a hero, who rose from the dead and did all these fancy miracles. None of that is history. That's that's just part of the mythology.
Exactly. And of course, Patrick won't go into those kind of subjects. But
Right.
you see, it's pretty obvious this was all mythology, and you can trace it. You can trace the origins of Yahweh. You can get the Greek influences, of the Greek mythology in New Testament. I don't know. Have you watched much of Dennis McDonald and his theories?
No, not
You
really.
know, he can. He's with a more scholars are going to like really. The New Testament was really influenced by Greek mythology.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
the New Testament was written in Greek. It wasn't written in Aramaic or Hebrew. It was originally in Greek. And to learn to write and read and write Greek at that time, you had to study Homer. That was the
Hmm.
main thing. And if you look through Greek stories and mythology, and even semi-historical writings of the time, you could see Homer, all through there, and he goes through the New Testament and shows those influences in there, and
Hmm.
it's pretty interesting. But you can
Yeah.
kind of see where they've cobbled together the Jewish mythology into the Greek mythology and crafted a story there, and it's
Yeah.
just
And
pretty awesome.
and homosexuality was never even mentioned, hardly in the, ever in the Gospels. Um, so that sort of
Right,
shows a really Greek influence, and even
right,
theories, and ideas about the scriptures sort of show that possibly Jesus was a gay person, you know, himself. He was definitely a drama queen.
well, yeah, without a doubt.
He was very
Yes,
zealous and emotional, and he really had, his beloved apostle John, when he came off the cross. We were talking about this earlier. John, look at your mother, and look at John, that's your son. So it's almost like, there, I mean, that's very possible. I mean,
very
no one really
possible,
knows.
right?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many hints, you know. He liked getting whipped by Roman soldiers.
Right. Whip me harder, right? Yeah.
That's right, baby.
But it is interesting though, that Paul. I think Paul's the only one that says anything against homosexuality in the New
Yeah,
Testament.
that's
Definitely
right.
Jesus does. Definitely not in the Gospels. And
Right.
it didn't seem like it was very important to them.
Yeah,
And
and
but
the gospels were written later than the letters of Paul,
Paul, right?
and they reflected more of a more evolved sort of picture of Jesus and that entire thing, the entire message. And it was very Greek.
Right.
It was very it was very Greek. It just reflected that sort of culture.
Yeah.
And like you said, the fisher, the disciples, the apostles, these were uneducated men.
Right.
So how could they have written anything? If they were
Exactly.
uneducated, they couldn't have written it. This, like you said, this was written in Greek. You know.
I heard a thing from Kip Davis just the other day, and the objection that that Christians will have. Well, okay, so after Jesus died, the disciples could have just learned to read and write. Maybe they
Hmm.
got a little older and learned to read and write, but he was pointing out that would be like nearly impossible. You had to be somebody of means. You had to have connections. It wasn't like you would just go to school for 8 hours a day. You would have to like pretty much live at a school. It was a whole different thing. And then
Hmm.
he's a real scholar, and he was claiming that you could tell, like, if like somebody was Aramaic or speaking Aramaic and learned how to write Greek, that you could tell that. Like if
Hmm.
you're reading the text, you could say, okay, this guy was a Greek, or this guy was speaking Aramaic and learned Greek.
Right.
Now I don't know how the heck you would do that, but these
Well,
scholars get into depth with things.
that's what it is. They they're more in a position to understand, the cultural context, to decide, what the intentions were, or what the book is about. And and most understand that the gospels was propaganda. It was religious propaganda, and it was an evolving sort of story. It was like the same story, but it's versions, like from Mark, Luke, Matthew, more Jewish, reflection.
Right.
And they'll say that, oh well, this proves that, that this was real, the diversity of outlooks. It's just a perception thing. Well, actually, no,
No.
they're very similar, and they're
That's,
very
yeah,
different in different ways.
right. And they are, like Mark is the shortest, simplest gospel. He doesn't have a virgin birth narrative. Um, there's
Right.
no post resurrection appearances. And
Right.
as you go, it gets further. And then John is
He's
way out there.
way out there. He's
All of a
yeah.
sudden now he's existed before time, and You know,
Mm-hmm. The
making him
logos.
God,
Yep.
right? But what another thing a lot of people ignore is the apocrypha. Then you've
Mm-hmm.
got like
Yeah.
the Gospel of Peter and the Gospel of Barnabas, and okay, sure they were later, but they kept on with the exaggerations. So if you put
Yeah. I
all
mean,
those
why wouldn't you?
together,
Yeah. I mean, why not use the same argument? It's not like John was written a day after the events. John happened in the second, was written probably in around the second century, um, which was,
well,
75, at least 75 plus years after um, the story. So, I mean, but yet, so what if, 200 years later we get, the Gospel of Thomas or whatever? Use that same argument.
right,
It was just, it was orally transmitted
right, the stories
and it's
just got
accurate.
bigger on down the line. Yeah,
But they got bigger down the line and you can see
that,
the differences,
yeah,
but they want to just dismiss those differences as, style of writing or,
right,
something very superficial when that's furthest from what the scholars tell us.
right.
Scholars tell us that it's very distinct.
Yeah, and you can it's even for layman, somebody like me, even that's pretty ignorant, I could see that. It's an
Hmm.
obvious thing. But when you don't want to see it, of course you're not going to see it. I mean,
Right.
I still argue with Christians that the apostles wrote the gospels and they were eyewitnesses, and that's the way it is.
Hmm.
And it's like that just doesn't square with reality.
No, not at all. And it's just a matter of bad epistemology. They believe these things on faith. Now,
Exactly.
someone like Patrick Yarnell will define faith as evidence.
Right.
Faith is the evidence of things hoped for. So
Things,
it,
things
so in
unseen.
yeah, things unseen.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense to
You know,
me. But
well,
how do you answer that? Like when
well,
people tell you that?
I answer it. Our Muslim friends have just as much faith in Allah as you have in Jesus.
Hmm.
You can believe anything on faith. So what good is it? It's not.
Hmm.
It's not a reliable path to knowledge.
Right.
I think that's what
But
hits you.
they'll tell you that you're defining faith in a different way than them.
Sometimes, yeah, right.
So if let's say they say, well, faith is evidence. So that doesn't apply to me because you're cherry picking a usage of the word when my usage is evidence of things that I'm hoping for. So how
You
do
know,
you answer that stupidity?
I mean, I still go back to the same thing. Our
Hmm.
Muslim friends have the same type of faith as you, the same
Hmm.
degree of faith, the same definition of faith. And you're going to say that they're wrong, that their
Hmm.
faith is not evidence for their God.
Right.
What's the problem over here? Can you see the difference? Can you see the similarity?
Right.
Which no, they can't.
Yeah, and they see you the same way. It all goes back to the outsider test of faith,
Right,
where from where he's sitting, you're the one who's not exercising true faith to find the true God.
right.
And, so it just goes round in circles. So it's just a presupposition. And that's why we get the presuppositional argument for Jesus
Yeah,
as God. And usually it's encompassed or entailed in the Trinity and all that kind of bullshit.
right. Oh,
Which,
the total precepts that drives me crazy. That is the worst epistemology ever.
oh, yeah.
You know
It, I mean, they mix in a little truth, but they kind of miss the point that they're in the same boat we are.
exactly.
Um, it's yeah, every worldview is ultimately circular. Every theory or hypothesis, especially, you can't explain your assumptions. You know, everything's based on an assumption, and theories never
Exactly.
explain the assumption. It just makes the assumption, and if you grant me this, then I can make a logical argument for this particular claim. Um, every theory does that, so that's where they're true. But they are doing the exact same thing And that's it. But the way to get through to them is to actually do an internal critique, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing is that they won't let you go there because they're kind of like, we don't want to talk about we don't want to talk
Right.
about, did Jesus walk on water?
Right.
We don't want to talk about morality. We want to talk about your worldview is not grounded on anything like ours is. So what I've done, Brian, and because it applies 100% the same under pantheism or naturalism, let's say, I ground all knowing of what is possible and impossible on the nature of reality. That's as far as you need to
Right.
go. So my view is a lot more parsimonious. You know, I'm
Exactly.
not introducing an extra, thing. I think mine is more parsimonious and internally consistent.
Exactly. Naturalism is the most parsimonious, outlook, worldview, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
I've been having these discussions. How did the universe come about?
Right.
God had to do it. Well, not really. The laws of physics can create universes, and the laws of physics actually exist. So why do we need to add God onto that?
Right.
You know,
It's just metaphysical baggage. It's like
right,
you know, the nature of what something is, no one really knows. Like no one knows the
right,
ultimate fundamental ontology of what reality is. Like, science isn't in the business of describing what something is, but how something behaves, how it works, what predictions we can make on it. And then from there, we can infer that this is a true fact for now, tentatively, until there's
right.
extra evidence against that claim. But, ontology, to really talk about what something is like, we talk about um, things like materialism, um, idealism, solipsism, um, dualism, you know, and so people can argue among themselves about which, ontology better describes, the reality we observe, but no one really knows that shit. It's just an assumption, and you know, and we all base our worldviews on our assumptions.
Exactly.
Maybe a god ontology, that
Right.
God explains reality, you know. But the funny thing about it is, what I found is that the same arguments they'll hurl against any other worldview can be sent right back to them.
Well, yeah, and that's what I do. Like, they're like, well, who created the laws of nature?
Right.
Nobody. They always
Nobody.
existed, right?
Right.
They
Hmm.
can't, because the universe wasn't around, so there wasn't any time or any space. Well, they
That's an
exist out.
assumption.
Yeah, well, I just say they exist outside of time and space.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
does your God live? Outside of time
Right.
and space. And you're right. Just keep turning that around and around on them, and it's
Yeah.
fun.
And and it's so crazy. It's it's one of those things where they cannot see, they can't see the flaws in their view. So, and the worst thing you can do with them is play the outsider test of faith, which I do all the time. And especially when I say, look, if they say, well, Jesus, um, he's the grounding for everything because the universe nothing can exist from nothing. Everything that began to exist, um, was caused, right?
Right.
So
So
God is that special pleading, because I'll say, well, replace the word God with, the nature of reality, whatever that is, because we don't know what it is.
right.
I just call it the nature of reality. And for some reason, they just can't wrap their head around it. They're like, well, reality can't just
Mm.
come into existence. Like, no one says reality came into existence. Reality always, well, that's just ridiculous. Nothing can just always exist except God.
except God.
You know, they'll never. They're special pleading their case, and they
Yeah,
don't see it.
always. Yeah, and it is, it is funny they can't even see that. But I've seen.
Yeah,
I know you've seen my quote from Carl Sagan. I don't know the whole quote offhand, but he's like, you know, nobody knows where the laws of nature came from, right? And he says it's a good hypothesis or a valid hypothesis to hypothesize a God created them and all that. But if you have to do that, why don't you just accept that the laws of physics always existed and you don't need God?
right.
And you're just adding another layer on there.
That's all it really is. And it's like, if you want to believe that, like if that's your opinion, and people have experiences of this God and things of that nature, that's fine. You can definitely, have you're entitled, everyone's free and
Every
entitled to their opinions, and they're valid to have experiences, and all of that. But you can't expect other people to just drop their own experiences. And that's why I say, someone like Patrick Yarnell, he sort of argues this solipsistic thing where he's like, yeah, you don't you're not valid to not believe. He's always like, you're in error for not believing. You have no valid reason to not believe. It's like, I can appeal to my experience, which is, look, I don't experience this God. What I do experience is something way beyond, you know, that, which is just my own imagination. And I can imagine so much more than your explanation right now. Your explanation is just contradictory, doesn't make sense. I can imagine a universe that doesn't necessarily entail a consciousness and a human like sort of personality. I can envision a lot of things, but I understand that it's just my fucking imagination. It's like,
right,
I'm not going to pass it off like it's some sort of truth.
you're right,
You know,
exactly. And
it's not.
that's one thing that's really interesting about the whole situation. You know, they argue against science and materialism and naturalism, and it's like, yeah, really, if you look at it, you know, that's not grounded on much. We're already talking about solipsism and dualism, other problems, the problems of induction. And you
Yeah,
can say, yeah, the foundations are pretty damn wackly. And then you've got the Christian that are like, my grounding's right here. God's perfect, 100%, blah, blah, blah. I got a firm foundation. But
yeah.
when you look at the situation, well, religion hasn't done a damn thing for anybody. It hasn't
Mm-mm.
brought one piece of knowledge to anybody. Whereas science, reason, materialism, naturalism, look what it's done for us. We got the greatest civilization in the history of the world. It,
Yeah, and they're and the thing is, they get, a lot of religious people get offended if you bring that up, and they'll say, well, you're confusing categories. Like, most scientists, when science was first a thing, they were all Christians. So, you know, you can't really say that this religion hasn't done it. That's not its purpose. Its purpose was never to cure cancer that way or figure out how to get to the moon. That's not the purpose of worshiping God. They'll say that, but what they don't understand is that their same holy book that they're referring to is promising, a new world. You know, at least in my religion, when I was a Jehovah's Witness, they told us that God was going to come back first in 1975, and then later on they changed the dates, and they keep promising what God's going to do: wipe all tears from your eyes, heal the sick. No one will be sorry. There will be no more crying anymore. The old things are forgotten. New heavens, new earth. All of these sort of promises. But if anybody's come through with anything close to that, would be science.
exactly. It's like we know the truth, but it's way out there, but we don't know squat about what's going on right here. So why should we believe that you know what's going on out there if you don't know what's going on down here? You know,
Yes.
and because
Yes.
religions, especially Christianity, have made scientific claims, historical claims,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they've been wrong.
They've been wrong.
So,
Absolutely.
so why should I believe they're right about anything?
Right.
You know,
Exactly. And there's things that we already all agree on that can be found in Bible that they'll say, thou shalt not, steal or,
right?
murder or, but by definition, these things are wrong. The definition of stealing is when you take something that doesn't belong to you, like murder is when you kill someone unjustly, like these are kind of baked into the concepts to begin with.
Right.
So when you build a religion around concepts that you've already all agreed on are wrong and right, it doesn't mean that the religion is true. It just means that there's a few principles in there we can all agree on, and they may not be true, like slavery. you
Right.
know,
You never.
like slavery, we
Yeah,
all agreed it was okay,
right. Back
and then
then,
later we changed our mind about that.
and the Bible was okay with it, and the Bible never changed. People had to evolve out of that.
Yeah, and yeah, and I
So,
think the reason why is because they don't want to lose ground there. God, if he sanctioned slavery, then that makes him evil and hypocritical because they themselves say that slavery is bad because even God freed his people from the Egyptians
right,
as slaves, that was a bad thing, right?
right,
So they kind of know that already. So when God's allowing slavery, well, it's to those other heathens around you, those guys. And then there's this other argument of well, indentured slavery is not
right.
immoral. It's an agreement, you
You
know.
know, well, first, indentured slavery is immoral, but that's their little bait and switch, because you could enslave another Hebrew like that, right? That was more
Mhm.
indentured servitude, and they could serve for so long, and you could let them free. But that
Mhm.
didn't apply to the other people, to other, you can go out there and conquer those Canaanites and bring them back, and they're just chattel slaves, but
Well, and then the
you
argument
know,
goes back to Jesus again. It's like, well, Jesus ended all that. That's why we don't have to worry about that. It's all about, you know, as Paul said, and even Jesus said, you love your slave and slaves love your master,
right,
and everybody's hunky dory.
right. So that is what's ironic, so they'll talk about, well, the Civil War, and you had a real religious group of people here, and you had preachers in the South saying the Bible says slavery is okay, and this is God sanctioned, and you had preachers in the North saying slavery is immoral, and the Bible says no,
Hmm.
and so which
Yeah,
one's
yeah.
right?
And then the other argument is, well, Christians were a big part of abolitionists, the abolition movement, and there were preachers that were advocating for the freedom of black slaves here in America.
Right,
But see, that's
but
just how the Bible is. It's a game of multiple choice, like
right,
beliefs by multiple choice book.
exactly. My favorite saying: even the devil can cite scripture for his own purposes,
Yes,
and that is about right.
yeah, and it seems like if God was so wise and was actually breathing His Spirit into the writers and inspiring them, couldn't He have come up with something a little more foolproof than that confusing book?
Exactly.
And if Jesus, the miracles, and all the stuff came out of that same book that's so fucking confusing, why should we listen to it? Why should we believe it?
Exactly. There's really no reason. That's the problem.
No.
And it's amazing. I guess it's just amazing. I mean, I was a Christian. I believed all that.
Hmm.
But today, so it's been a while, and I'm like, how could I have really believed all that?
Yeah.
There's just, I mean,
Yeah.
you could start with the Old Testament. The earth wasn't made in 6 days, or the universe wasn't made in 6 days. There was no Exodus. There was no slavery in Egypt. There was no conquest of Canaan. You can go on and on. I mean, these things did not happen.
Yeah, and I
They
don't
just didn't happen.
understand. I don't understand, especially what confuses me are people that Christians, which most Christians believe on evolution. You know, they
Right.
believe in
Yep.
evolution. Most do.
Yep.
Um, in fact, the president or founder of the or head of the Human Genome Project is a evangelical Christian guy.
Is that
You know,
Crick?
no, not
No,
Crick,
no,
but
no.
I forget the guy's name.
Yeah.
I'll find it. Hold on just a second. I want to get it right. But he believes the Bible, but he also believes in evolution. You
Yeah,
know,
that's most Christians.
yeah.
Even though there's a large contingent, of young Earth creationists here in the United States.
Francis
And
Collins, that's his name.
Francis Collins, like, yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So my question is, if
right,
Jesus, who referred to Adam and Eve, and he referred to, sin entering the world and, him saving the world, and, he sort of referred to Noah and that
right.
as a literal story. How does that square with evolution?
You know, our young Earth creationist friends would say it doesn't.
Right.
A lot of them. But I would think, your typical Christian is going to say, well, that was all allegorical. It was all metaphorical.
Phony
Even
flag
Jesus.
waver.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly.
He's a
But
phony
I think,
flag waver.
yeah, but I think that's what most of them do say, really.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
because
and
it's
and
undeniable. It's they understand that the evidence for evolution is undeniable, and so they're like, well, we can't just stop being a Christian now, so we just get to
right,
go and reinterpret the New Testament in
exactly,
in what Jesus believed and what is necessary to be saved. But it just seems like, why would you need to be saved if you understand how evolution works? You
right,
know that this whole story of inherited sin is bullshit. We didn't come from Adam and Eve in a Garden of Eden. You know, that story is, if you're taking that stuff literal, which by the way, most scholars understand too, that cultures, especially in that region in that time period, always wrote allegorical stories.
yep,
Everything was an allegory. The book of Job was an allegory.
yep,
Um, all of they're just stories that teach some sort of moral. That's all it is. And that's how they communicated, because that's how they saw things in reference to something else. So the scholars teach us that.
exactly. And these people were mostly illiterate. So the people that were writing down were writing stories that people could tell, that people could remember, that would resonate with them, and
Hmm.
stick around for a couple thousand years. I've heard, there was a saying that, I don't know, I can't remember the whole saying, but it was kind of like, those people wrote the Bible, meaning it allegorical, and
Hmm.
man, I wish I could remember that saying. But they wrote it like that. But now modern people are interpreting it literally.
Right. Oh yeah.
And there's
Well.
a lot to that.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. And you've got people like Adam and Eve, William Lane Craig, that talks about
Yeah,
you know Adam and Eve as Heidelberg
mm,
man,
right. Mytho
and
historical.
mytho historical,
Mytho.
and he sort of understands that that book was a certain kind of genre,
Right.
and you're to understand it that way. And so he'll make the argument when people say, well, Jesus refers to Adam and Eve, it seems, in inherited sin and things of that nature. And he says, oh, well, he's talking about it also metaphorically. You know,
Right.
Jesus oftentimes described things in parables, and that's how people spoke. That's how rabbis taught back then, was in parables and stories, and allegories. They weren't to be taken literal. Let the person who understand hear, what I'm saying, you know, and with wisdom, rather than. So, there's cases like we go back to the Christ consciousness thing where it's like, look, these fundamentalists, they worship this comic book version of
Right.
Jesus, where we're worshiping this, not Jesus as a God man, but the beingness of Jesus. What is it like to be Jesus in your own experience? Be self-sacrificing, be loving, forgiving, merciful, um, all of this stuff. It's a way of being
Right.
rather than worshiping some, mytho figure.
Right. I mean, yeah, right. They're trying to give us lessons, and there's a lot of valuable lessons there. Jesus, was supposed to be a moral character,
Hmm.
and there are things we can learn from it. But, you know, I've kind of, I've been talking to a lot of Muslims lately, and,
Mm.
and it's kind of the same thing.
Hmm.
There really is a lot of good things in the Quran,
Yeah.
you know, but it doesn't offset the bad things in it. And it
Right.
sure doesn't make it true, and it's like the good things in it. It's just like with the Bible. That's just things people know. Like you said,
Right.
you don't kill, you don't steal, you don't lie. These
Right.
things are just flat wrong. We don't need God or Allah to tell us that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then you start throwing in, killing each other and conquering each other and having slaves. Well, you kind of
Yeah.
upset the
And
balance there.
yeah, a lot of people will say, well, it was customary for secular writers to also refer to God in their literature, even on secular matters, like historians way back in those times that would describe a situation like a war. It was, so God gave the enemy to the hand of
Right.
me. What? Like that's just the way they expressed themselves. They weren't maybe. It wasn't a some. It was all kind of baked in. Like they don't.
Right.
That's what we sort of don't understand sometimes when we have these conversations. Is that culture, that stuff was not even. There was no political versus the religious side. Like it was all melded together.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of culture we're talking about. And so, it's easy for folks to argue, well, that was sort of hyperbolic language, by the writers. It doesn't mean that God actually commanded, to kill the Amalekites, the women, children, babies, infants, whatever, cattle. That was just their expressing God commanded us, and we went forth and in the name of God
Right.
did blah 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 blah. So was that part inspired by God? A lot of progressive liberal, phony flag wavers, they'll kind of go along with the scholars on that, but then cherry pick other things that are inspired of a real God, you know,
Right.
Jesus or
There,
whatever.
I had an interesting conversation with the guy the other day, and I brought up, we were talking. Oh, look who's here!
Look who's here,
Oh,
Victor.
snap. Hey, man, I
What's
just got a
Going
happening?
couple of
on,
minutes,
man?
man. What's up, Mr. B? Where you been? What
Oh,
happened?
I don't know, man. I got in trouble over there. How
I'm
you doing,
still,
Mr. B?
I'm busy, man. I work too much over here, man. Look, I'm still with the white coat,
Yeah,
everything.
you couldn't help but jump in
Burning
on this one.
midnight
I was,
Yeah,
I knew you were out there. Your energy was out there, so I was like throwing it out there. I was like, let
yeah.
me talk stuff over here. Blah 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 blah. Get
So
them
what you
in.
guys? So let me get this straight, right? This is what I have trouble with, right? Everybody say, oh, some Jesus existed, right? But why should we care? Why should I care if some Jesus? My grandfather's name was Jesus. You know that? My son,
Mm,
my son's name is Jesus. Nobody cares about him.
right, right.
But the reason we care about this Jesus is because he claimed to be God.
Hmm.
So it's very simple. All we got to do is okay. how far do we got to go back to see the earliest? What's the earliest sources there is that talks about Jesus? Where does every historian go to first in order to debunk Christianity? Where do they go first?
The
And we're not
Apostle
talking about,
Paul,
huh?
the writings of Paul,
Not only that,
the writings of Paul. They
the
came
writings
real early.
extremely early. And to my surprise, I found some information the other day, Mr. B. There are some non-friendly atheist scholars who just said he was just a couple of months late. I was like, what? That creed was so early. They go, the one that had me surprised was 3 years, but everybody goes with 5 years. That
Mhm.
is way too early to be a legend or mythical.
Okay, okay. Let me ask you this, Victor, because I didn't get to last time. Why do you say that's too early to develop a myth?
Because okay, this is my opinion, right? This is what I'm saying.
Hmm.
First of all, when people say that eyewitness testimonies are not reliable, I think that's wrong. I think, yes, they're unreliable when the prosecutor can prove they're unreliable. When they can be proven. I've been reading these books about criminal psychology. I've been reading these books about how to show evidence in court. I've been reading this book, why 50-50 chance eyewitness are unreliable, and then they show you why they're reliable. But they always tell you this: it's up to the lawyer to prove or disprove an eyewitness. So in my situation, if 5 years, right, is way too early, because if they were saying, okay, listen, this whole thing is a lie, this is a lie.
Mhm.
How come nobody came out? Now I want you to imagine this: nobody came out and said, listen, the body is the body of Jesus is still laying in the tomb.
Okay,
Everybody could have been proved a liar. And anyway,
well, but
so here's the question: what do we do with the eyewitness accounts?
you don't
Why
have
would
any
they?
eyewitness accounts.
What
Huh?
eyewitness account? Yeah,
You don't
what
have any
Okay,
eyewitness?
eyewitness
What
accounts.
are you talking
all
about?
right,
But first of
okay.
all,
So
can we back up a second, Victor?
yeah, go ahead.
This is Let's go back to that. Why do you think it takes a long time for a legend to develop?
I
Does it
don't
seem
know. That's not my claim. I don't know how long does it take. Some people said, who was it? Bob Ehrman, the one who said it takes about 100 to 150 years.
no? Bart Ehrman never said that.
Mm-mm.
No, no,
No.
He never said that. Who was that?
guarantee.
Hey,
Who?
hey, Victor, did you hear about that alien that landed in Las Vegas?
No, I heard a lot of very good claims about aliens, though.
Yeah, did you hear that claim? Do you know how fast that legend went around? Do you know now that they've got websites, videos, people creating stories? People are now adding to the story, like where the aliens were gone to other people's house and interacted with them on that level. The spaceship that they took off with is considered this and named that. Like a whole legend has sprouted out about this alien visitation in Las Vegas. That thing happened 3 weeks ago.
Uh huh.
So we've got a legend already. And even though, remember the story about the Mary Magdalene was seen by 5,000 people back in 1910?
Yep. Yep.
That
Yep.
legend
Now,
spread the
now,
same day. The
we're
same
talking.
day it hit the newspapers. It hit all sorts of stories around the world. It became infamous, right?
And
So,
still today, there's a lot of Catholic exorcists. I don't know. I've been getting into exorcism, doing and they say also that sometimes they'll mention the Virgin Mary, and the Virgin Mary will come out, and they will let you
mhm.
know. You know, listen. In order for me to say I believe this, I want to read the story myself. I want to see. Okay, this guy is claiming this guy is claiming this. So what do I see in Mark? Mark is the earliest, right, that is considered to be uh close to the earliest gospel account for Jesus, right? So supposedly Mark was a scribe of Peter, okay, and before that he was named the Gospel of Peter, okay. So
Hmm.
my question is this, okay, why would they lie about it? And if you lie about it,
Wow.
what was their motives?
See, we're
Why would
back.
they lie about it? What was their motives? Because
Well,
Back to all of that.
that's a good. I can't wait to talk about that one, but we still need to talk
Right.
about how long does it take to form a legend, because that was the first thing that you brought up. So, do you know? Does it make a difference to you how long it takes to make a legend? How would that change anything? So you say that, well, the legend of Jesus happened within what, 1 to 3 years. Okay. Well, we know now, we see it happen every day on social media, how legends can happen overnight. People can
but
see
wait, wait,
things
wait,
in the
wait.
sky.
Look at
So
your question though. Look at your question though. You say it's a legend. How do you know it's a legend?
I'm not, that's a different topic. What I'm asking you is, how long does it take to form a legend? Would you say 3 weeks?
I
Since
have
we
no
see
idea.
this,
I
I
would
mean,
know.
you have
I
no
I don't
idea. So you
know.
don't know how long it takes to
Yeah,
form a
I would.
legend. So this is the thing. What do you think the relevance is, that it takes too long to form a legend? Like, why is that a point in your favor? I'm not sure.
Well, my whole question is, I go back to the eyewitness. Why make up a god? Why make up a
I
god?
can imagine a million reasons,
I
but
mean,
go ahead.
Right,
people
right. But look,
make up
let's.
gods all the time.
If I'm gonna make a god, why not make it a Walt Disney god, where everything there's all benefits and I can do whatever I want?
How many of those exist?
Right.
How many of those? I don't know how many of those exist, but look at
None,
Walt Disney though.
none, none. So you answer your
Wait,
own
wait, wait,
question.
wait. Look
You
at
answer your
look
own
at the
question.
Muslim. And I'm sorry to say this about Islam. I'll let any Muslim defend their God, but I watch this. The Islam God benefits man. Although if this was a Muslim world, I'd be happy. How many wives could I have?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Hey, let me
Hey,
ask you
man,
this: do you
Well,
think Islam is a legend? Do you think the story of Muhammad was a legend?
man, somebody said the other day that they don't really know if Muhammad exists. I can't really.
So you're
I was
saying it
surprised
was
to
a
hear
legend.
that.
If he didn't exist, then you
I,
think that
I,
he's a
I'm
legend.
not saying that. I'm not saying that. I saw a debate with Matt Delahanty and somebody else, and I can't quote him, because I'm so worried about the break time. But
Hmm.
I do remember somebody saying that we don't even know if he really existed. But let us assume
Okay.
he existed. Let us assume he existed, right? Let us assume he existed. I really don't worry whether he's a legend or not. What I want to know, how can I verify his claims? First of all, Muhammad claims or personal claims. And what do I mean by this? That he was all alone in the cave, which means all I
Hmm.
have to is either I believe him or not.
If you don't believe him, I would say I would lean towards you. In my opinion, you would lean towards him being a legend, because a legend doesn't exist. A legend is a fiction. So if you're
All right.
saying that he didn't exist, if your opinion is he none of that happened, then you would say those things are of legend, right?
No, I'm not exactly a legend. I'm not saying whether he's a legend or not. What I'm saying that if he existed and he made a claim that he saw the angel Gabriel, but who was there to witness him?
who was there to witness the angel telling Mary that she was going to have a virgin birth?
Well, according to one gospel, there was more than one woman there.
Okay. So who
A
was there when Jesus was in the mountain talking to Satan about
Who was there?
when he tempted God and said, jump off this
Nobody
mountain and
was
not a
there.
rock
Nobody
would
was there.
harm you. Okay. So
Nobody was there.
do you believe that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so now what we have on face value is
Right.
special pleading. We have a special
No,
pleading
no, it's
fallacy.
not a special pleading because the reason it's not a special pleading is because when when you see a consistency and a reliability of a document, there's no reason to doubt it until proven to be a lie. So my question is, right, if Jesus had been making all these claims and it has been verified, right, according to the internal critique of the story, then I have no reason to doubt Jesus.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is if you can be convinced of
The reliability of the document.
75% of somebody's story, let's say I told you 75 to 90% of what you verified, but there was like this last 10% you really couldn't verify, you would go ahead and trust me. Is that true?
That happens most of the times. Look,
Well,
can we
hey, well, 1 second.
right?
So, do you know that scam artists, that's the exact game they play, but they go to 99%. All they need is that 1%.
Yeah, it's
So
true.
they will convince you they are telling the truth up to 99% of the time. All they need
But,
is that 1% of trust, and then they got you. So,
well,
how would one protect themselves from a scam artist like that? What do you
right.
think the best
Okay.
tool to use would be?
Well, look at it this way. What are the chances? Let me ask. Watch what I'm gonna do, Mr. B.
Well, I'm asking a
Right. Just to
question
give
for a
you,
purpose.
yeah. Right.
What
So,
tool would you use to
right. Here's my
protect yourself?
analogy. Now, watch this. We've been arguing with Mr. Brian for a long time that God doesn't exist. He can even make the claim that Jesus is a legend, right?
Hmm.
Now imagine we know that he doesn't believe in Jesus. We know that he wants nothing to do with Jesus. What will we do if tomorrow he wakes up and gives us a call and say he saw Jesus?
But Victor, why are you deflecting from the question I asked you? Like we can
No,
talk about
because
that, but
there's no
I'm
way. Because there's no way to know. I mean, if I've been knowing you for a long time, right?
mhm,
like
right.
like we've been knowing each other for 3 years and we've been debating and everything, and all this time I know that you got no business to do with Jesus, but all of a sudden you wake up and you're with Jesus, and I ask you, wait a minute, you hated Jesus, you hated the whole New Testament. What changed your mind?
I
So
think
here's
we got an equivocation there though,
Well, there's
because
no
you're saying
certain
that
well
because you're saying what you're saying is true. So I'll say you're right about this part. We usually interact with a lot of faith and trust in each other every day.
right,
And people that we just meet, especially, we're a little more on guard about. And usually, people, if they want to protect themselves from being scammed by people, it would be best to put your guard and a high standard of evidence. The higher it is, the more protected you are,
right,
for claims. Now, there's a point where that person's won your trust 100% every time. And in that case, it's only natural because now you know that person. You have an intimate relationship with that person. This is a person. But here we're talking about a book. We're talking
right,
about writers you could never meet. You never knew them. They're anonymous. They don't have their, publishing. They didn't publish their name. It's just tradition that gave them the book name.
right.
But we
Well,
know, even according to the book itself, they were not eyewitnesses of these things. These were things that they heard from supposed eyewitnesses. They didn't get names for many of them.
no. You read the books of John. John says, that which we have seen, we have touched, we have heard. All right. The first book of John says that. The only one who wasn't an eyewitness was Luke, the companion of Paul. And he says, I went back to make sure that what he said, dear Theophilus, I went and rechecked to make sure that everything that have been saying around here is true, so that you may be certain that these things happens. He's the only one who wasn't there. He was the companion. But the other ones you can make an argument.
no, you can't.
Now,
Not for Mark. You can't. He tells you right away.
I'm sorry.
Mark tells you he wasn't a witness.
Who?
Mark.
The original gospel was
The
wasn't.
original. What do you
Yeah,
mean by the original gospel? We don't have the original gospels.
okay. The first.
No, in the
first
book
gospel.
that you were referring
Mark.
to, the Mark you referred to is what I'm saying. The very book that you believe, Mark, that same book.
That he wasn't an eyewitness. He says that.
Yes.
Where?
He was a scribe of Peter.
I'm sorry?
He was a scribe of Peter. You just said that.
Right.
Right. So
Peter was there.
maybe he was, but Mark wasn't there.
Yeah, but so does everybody had scribes in the past. What does that mean?
Did they? And
Yeah,
so,
that's what every historian says.
No.
And the biggest, the biggest fellow that is Bart Ehrman. Look at the argument he gave this other guy who was saying debaptizing Jesus, Christians. Bart Ehrman said everybody had a scribe. There's nothing wrong with having a scribe. Now, what I want to see,
except that doesn't really work because the Gospels were written in Greek. They weren't written in Aramaic or Hebrew. So
no,
the disciples all spoke Aramaic.
they all spoke Aramaic.
Yeah.
So right, and they couldn't write in Greek.
No.
That would really be.
Why not?
That would be contradictory to the story itself. They were described as uneducated men, like fishermen, tax collectors, people that didn't
Right, Peter
have
was
that
okay.
sort of stature. You do know that back then, Jewish people were not that educated for the most part. They weren't taught how to read or write or any
No.
of those things.
Every scholar and every historian say that the percentage of people that were educated were 10 to 12%. Okay,
Yeah,
so
but
where is that is the aggregated data. Now, how do you know that the scribes or the apostles were all of them were illiterate? How do you know that?
that's just what the scholars tell you.
Exactly.
That's
So
what
we
their
don't know.
consensus
So
is.
there's no
Well,
right.
they do know. They have. I would say they have a lot of evidence for that based on our cultural understanding.
No, Luke was a
time.
physician. He was highly educated. Luke
No,
was
that
highly
wasn't. A physician wasn't considered an educated person back then.
Yes, he was, and he's one considered a very good historians. Look it up. F. Bruce
Who could?
and T. Wright. He'll tell you. Luke and I'm about to leave, but look,
Okay.
Luke was a physician. He was educated. Mark was described as the scribe of Peter, so he had to know Greek. Okay. Now you have
Mhm.
Matthew, a tax collector. I don't think the Roman Empire is going to put an idiot to do their math. So
Well,
he
he wouldn't
has
have
to
to be
be
an
educated.
idiot, but you understand that reading and writing isn't like here, where you'd have to be an idiot if you don't read and write. A lot of people, like you said, only 10% of the population could read and write, and there was a
Right.
lot of educated, and most of those people weren't stupid, and a lot of those people were fishermen, tax collectors, people like that.
Right, but we have no evidence. The only one who said who was illiterate was Peter. Peter said
Right.
it that I'm not defending Peter because Peter did come out and say it, and I think there was a couple of them. But John had a scribe. Paul had a scribe. Even Paul, some of the writings of Paul are authentic and they're undeniable by both friendly and unfriendly scholars. So yeah, we're dealing here with a speculation just because Peter said he was illiterate. No, some
Right.
people do that in general, but this is aggravated. It's like saying like this. Okay, well, I look Spanish, Scott looks Spanish, and Mr. B looks Russian, and they can't speak Chinese. Based on what fact? Unless we confess that we can't speak Chinese, we don't know if.
See, you're bringing in the modern world to the ancient world.
No, I'm going by what that 10-12% is saying that we
Right.
don't know. Nobody specified which apostle couldn't write and read. The only one was Peter.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It
ahead.
doesn't mean that there's proof that these guys were not literate. They could have been
Right.
literate to some degree or another, maybe.
Yes.
But but as you said, no one knows that for sure because
But they
we understand the culture of the
Right.
time,
I agree. And
and
the
they-
only
and they
evidence we have are the Gospels. So until right now we're dealing with a speculation. I can agree. I mean, if they're illiterate, they probably had scribes. But we have the evidence right now, until
Okay.
proven false, that hey, these guys were not the scribes of Peter and Paul and the apostle John and Matthew and Mark. So until
let's
now, all
grant-
the evidence we have is that The gospel
let's
weren't written
grant
by eyewitnesses.
So let's
No.
grant that they were all. Let's grant that they were all educated people. Let's grant that they were all
Right.
educated people. Do you think that Jesus walking on water was history?
Yeah.
Did they record history?
If he claims, well, that's what I'm saying. See, if we want to cut off the head of the snake, why not disprove the resurrection?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. If you believe it's history, why do you when most scholars don't think that's the case?
What do you mean?
Like
scholars?
most scholars, most New Testament scholars don't consider the miracle stories as history. You can look that
No,
up.
the only one who's or doing that is Bob Price, Richard Carrier, because I've been watching their debate. And watch this, Scotty, and I want you to look it up where Bob Ehrman is having a discussion about the resurrection. And watch this, he gets pinned to the wall. And he doesn't want to call it a resurrection. He said he starts laughing and say, I would call it something weird. He could not think of any other alternative argument. And what he said was this: well, I think people coming back from the dead, and if I see him again, I wouldn't call it a resurrection. I would call it something weird. That's look, man. Here's what I'm saying. Okay, we can destroy all the claims of the Bible just by simply disproving the resurrection. That's why I'm interested in this. How do you?
That's bad epistemology. That's not how. That's not how logic works. You don't.
Right.
You don't believe something because you can't disprove it. If that's the case, you've got to vet. That's like the definition of the lowest standard. Yeah, that's the lowest standard.
Look up.
I've already looked. I'm looking at it right now.
Okay.
And it's what I'm seeing.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second, Victor. Let me address what you've said.
Yeah.
So what you've made is a huge claim that the miracle stories of Jesus are considered actual history. That's what you're telling us here. And what I'm telling you is, according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, according to Wikipedia, and it's got references, and it says right here that ever since the Enlightenment, most scholars have been highly skeptical about the claims of miracles in the Bible. That's what it says right here.
Right.
And then it goes on, and it just goes on and on and on with the references.
Yeah. Well, we're going back to the same old question. We look at the claim, and we see how consistent is it? Like last time we had the discussion. The Elvis, didn't Elvis claim? Didn't people claim that Elvis? Was it you that brought that up? That Elvis was still what people making?
Yeah,
okay,
people claim that. Yep.
Scotty, the simple way to disprove that: let's go dig his grave, see if his body's still there.
Yeah, but
His body's
Jesus,
not there. He's long decomposed.
He's decomposed. We don't know where he was
buried. Okay, you don't think if we really wanted to find out?
How would you? Let me ask you. How would you know if let's say they dug up some bones, they thought were Jesus? Why do you think they would have thought they were the actual? Like you said before, there are a lot of Jesus. Jesus is a very common name, especially in ancient Israel. So you see a little tomb that says Jesus on it, and you're assuming that that's the same Yahshua.
I gotta go.
Okay.
Listen, man, we gotta do this, man. Hey, let's do this again. We gotta do this part 2. I gotta go, man.
All right, man.
Hey, next time it's the authorship of the Gospels.
The authorship of the Gospels.
Yeah.
When do you want to do this? Let's do it on Saturdays or the only days I could do it.
Oh, Saturday. So
let's see if you guys.
My schedule has changed. My schedule has changed a little bit.
I still want to get Pine Creek. I hope he sees his Pine Creek. I'm on you.
You gotta call in, man.
Hey, you gotta call in.
I know. I call in. Hey, dude. I'm gonna tag you guys, man.
See us Thursdays, man.
See you, man. Thursday.
I always see him. I even subscribe to him. He making some ridiculous claims, man. He says and I'm gonna quote him right now, even though I'm like, give me a second, boss. Hold up.
No, you need to get out of here, man.
He said,
man. Don't get in trouble.
He said this. I know hell don't exist. How the hell you know? Did you die?
Yeah.
And so I'm telling him right now, look, hey, Scotty, I'm gonna make you famous, man. I'm Billy the Kid.
Okay. Okay.
Hey man, I'm gonna get him, man. I'll see you, man. I love you guys.
All right, man. He is so funny, man.
He's a good guy, man. At
He's
heart,
like a
man. He's got a good heart.
yeah. He's got a good heart. That's like in the South. That's like a middle finger. He's got a good
No, I
heart.
didn't mean it. I didn't mean to say bless
I
his,
know
if I
what you
said
mean.
bless his heart. If I said bless his heart,
Yeah,
right,
bless his heart. Yeah, that's
that's
the one.
it, right? Yeah.
Bless your heart.
Oh, jeez. But
Oh my goodness.
it's like trying to nail Jello to a wall, man.
Yeah.
You try to address one thing, and he's off on another one,
Yeah.
and that's real common too. With the
Yeah.
apologists
Like we never got along. We never got an
never
answer to the question.
to any
How
of
long does it take a legend to form?
them, right?
And he's like, I don't know. Then what's the point? What is your
Right?
point? If you don't know, you just came on here to correct you about it and say that it takes at least 5 years or 20 years or something like that.
Right.
You know,
And
but the Gospels were written within 3 years, so that wasn't enough time for a legend to develop. And it's like
you
that's
know,
not true.
that's just not. I mean, yeah, I just don't understand how they. That's something I don't understand. How you cannot see that it happens all the time.
Sai Baba,
All the time. Sai Baba, the Mormons,
yeah.
you know,
I mean, the legend was
every
formed while the man was still alive. That's
right,
the
right,
thing. That's when it was formed. Was
right.
when he was alive, and then that's when the story just spread. The legend spread. You know.
But you'll see how he kind of jumps around. It's like, okay, well, we got eyewitness accounts of Jesus, we should believe them. And
Mhm.
then we say, well, we got eyewitness accounts of Sai Baba, we should believe those. Well, no, because of something else.
Yeah, all this
And
other garbage.
right, and
Yeah,
then you go over to something else. Okay, well, that's the same. Well, but it's not. And you just kind of chase around in circles like that a lot of times.
yeah.
So
I mean,
I
that's
see,
bad epistemology.
yeah, and I see you tried a little street epistemology on him,
Yeah,
but he would not be
yeah,
pinned. He
yeah.
was
He was really fighting against it. I kept trying to bring him back.
right,
Reel him back in, but he would just avoid that question because he realized he wasn't making a point.
right,
And I wanted to really hone in on that part because this is what you're building your stuff on. When something fails, you just jump to something else.
exactly,
And then when that fails, you just jump to something else. It's like, dude, it shouldn't be failing.
right,
If this
exactly,
is true, you shouldn't be failing at all. If
exactly,
it's as true as you say it is. Anyways.
but that's real common. I get we get that all the time. On these internet chats and stuff. You know, one thing,
Yeah.
okay, one thing, no, it's this, and it's all special pleading every time.
Yeah. Yeah. You saw that. Like,
But
yeah, it's always a special plead for
for
their
my,
favorite.
yeah,
Yeah. And I try to avoid that myself, and in what I do and believe. And really, I'm more of someone who just admits they don't really know
yeah,
um
that,
the ultimate truths like that. Like that's just way out of my pay grade. And but if you're going to convince me that you know, then you should have a higher standard of evidence that you can present
exactly,
that would be more convincing to me. Because like I said, I tried to use that story about con artists win your trust 99% of the time. All they need is that last little
yeah.
percentage of your
Well,
trust.
what I didn't get to put in there was he was like saying, what if I said I saw Jesus? Well, the
Hmm.
problem with that is I've thought occasionally, I should just become a preacher.
Yeah,
I could do it, right? I could make some money just talking the Bible.
right.
So if I ever came up to
Hmm.
you and said, "Hey, I had a conversion, I saw Jesus," you better be suspicious about that.
Yeah.
That may not be a
Yeah,
claim you want to take on faith.
so true, man.
Right?
And yeah, this was really a great conversation, man. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, me
And
too.
next time, hopefully, um I don't know if I'll be able to do it on Saturday because I've got
Yeah,
stuff planned for July 4th. celebrations and
Well,
stuff upcoming.
what why don't we try it for Sunday? If we could like maybe
Yeah.
get regular on Sundays and
Yep.
Wednesdays,
That's
people
what we're gonna
would be
do.
able,
That's
would be
right.
able to find us. That would be
That's
good.
right. And this is,
And
guys, this is just a hangout where we discuss, religion, science, philosophy, epistemology, any and everything. I have a lot of weird beliefs, um, and then things that I don't believe. I'm very skeptical about, but I want to know what makes sense. I want to work it out and see if it resonates with me. So conversation is how you do that.
exactly.
And this is not an echo chamber. I'm sure me and Brian will disagree on a lot of different things, but that's not what's important. What's important is that we can discuss it
Yeah.
and have a discussion.
I mean, we always have a good time with Victor. We
Yep.
don't agree with almost anything he says, but we're getting his points, seeing
Hmm.
his point of view, and having a good conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's about. That's what it's about, man. Well, look, man, I'm going to
All right,
go ahead and
Scotty.
get off here, and we'll be reconvening on Sunday, brother.
All right, sounds good. You have a good one. Enjoy them kids, man.
Okay, thank you,
All right.
man.
Talk at you
Bye-bye.
later.
Yep.